Hi there, I'm Eitan, and welcome to WiX Fixer. Today we're going to start talking about the long-awaited WiX Data API. The WiX Data API lets you interact with WiX collections, WiX data collections, using Velo code, and it lets you update those collections, get information from those collections in various ways, and it's a very powerful and useful WiX API. Today we're going to be talking about the get method over here, which I think is the simplest and best place to start with the WiX Data API. So let's get started. Okay, so first I'm going to just copy this code, this boilerplate code over here, and head over to my WiX website. And then I'm going to pop open my code panel over here and zoom way in so that you have a good view. Excellent. Now I'm just going to paste the code that I copied right in here. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that you know little to no Velo. If you know some Velo, then you might find this a little repetitive, but I prefer aim for the people that really have no experience, that I cover all my bases. So first of all, we have this import line right over here. And these import lines always need to go on the top level, right above your onReady function. Okay, and basically what that does is it takes in it imports the library, the WiX data library, which is a lot of code that's written somewhere that actually does what's happening here. And you, on the front end, you just get this nice, clean WiX data class with a method. And what this does, the WiX data.get, is it takes a collection ID and an item ID, and it returns the entire item. And they give you an example here of what you should be getting back. So this is an object, and it has all of the fields and their corresponding values of a certain item. Uh, and now let's try it out. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go to my collection that I created in one of the previous videos. And it's this collection example. And I'm going to go ahead and first I'm going to get the collection ID. So I'm going to go here to edit settings. And then right over here, I have the collection ID, and I'm just going to copy that right over. And now I need to zoom out so that I can actually exit this modal. Zoom out a little more and X out that. Great, let's zoom right back in. And right over here, I am just going to change this to the collection that I'm using, okay, which is collection example. Okay, you could also change this to a variable out here. So let's say, for example, const my collection is equal to collection example. And instead of putting the actual collection name here, you can put the variables. That would be my collection. Okay. And the next thing I want to get is the item ID of the item that we are going to be getting. And for that, I need to open the collection. And then go right over here. And you can see here that I have the item ID field over here. And let me just zoom out so you can see that a little better. And if you don't see the item ID field, then you might need to go to Manage Fields and toggle it on. Okay, because usually it is hidden because it's a system field. And I'm just going to go over to one of these, let's say both Creighton, and I'm just going to click copy, and you'll see that one cell has been copied. That means that my ID has been copied. And I'm going to go ahead and close this, and I'm going to go ahead and close this side panel. And let's zoom right back into the code. And I'm going to do the same thing here like I did for my collection. So I'm going to say const my ID. is equal to, and then I'm going to paste this in, and don't forget to put it inside of a string, okay, by putting it inside quotation marks. And then I just need to switch out this 0001 with my ID. Excellent. So now what should happen when I run this page code is that WiX Data will get this specific item, and then it'll log this item in a similar fashion to this. So let's check that out. I'm going to go over to preview. And here we have our log, which is an object, and you see here first name Creighton, file ID owner, etc. All of the data from that item that we got. So now you might be saying to yourself, okay, so this seems a little convoluted. Why did I have to go into my collection, get an ID, and then use it in the front end? It doesn't seem like a realistic situation, and you're right. But there are several use cases where you might want to get data using the ID, and you'd have the ID from some other location. So let me start with a example that's also semi-realistic. So for example, let's say that I have an input, okay, over here on my website that takes the ID. And then here I have a text field that's your name. So I'm going to go over here and I'm actually going to change this to ID input. And I'm going to change this text field to name display. And then what I'm going to do is instead of getting my ID from here in the code like this, I'm going to get the ID from the value of this ID input. And I'm going to also just add a button in here just to run the code at a specific point. So I'm going to get a button over here. And let's just put this button over here, even though you usually have it on the right. And this will just be ID submit button. Okay. And then what we're going to do is that when the ID submit button is clicked, okay, so I'm going to add an event listener over here. And this is stuff that I've touched in previous tutorials. So if you're not sure what an event listener is, you might want to go back and check out some of the Velo 101 videos. And here I'm going to say on click. And then in this on click method, I'm going to be running a certain function. And what is that function? So let's create that function over here. You could either create the function inside the onClick, like I was about to start doing over here by going like this and then writing the function inside. But I actually want to write the function on the outside because it's a little cleaner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just write my function right over here. So I'm going to say find name with ID. Okay, that's what we're going to be doing in this function. And the way this function is going to work, so it's going to take it, my collection is going to be a given. Okay, that's not going to be a variable, but my ID is going to be equal to the value of that ID input. So ID input, I guess I wrote it with a capital by accident, and then dot value. Okay, and then we're going to run this again. Okay, but inside of the function, right over here. And after we get the item, so I'm going to console it, but I'm also going to do one more thing, and that is going to set the value of the name display. Okay, so name display dot text will be equal to item dot, and here you need to check up what you named your field. So if you're in Velo, then there's a really handy way of doing that now, which is actually quite new. You can just open the collection here in databases, and you have a list of all of the fields using their actual field ID. Because remember, there's a field name and there's a field ID. And what you need is the field ID. Okay, so I'm going to just copy over. And so here I see that the field is called first name. So that's what I'm going to need to write over here. Item.first name. Okay, because item is essentially an object and first name is the key inside of that object that has the value of the first name. Okay, and then here the last thing I need to do is just pass this function into my onClick event. So the name of the function was find name with ID, and I'm going to pass that right into the onClick event listener. Remember, you do not put the parentheses like that because that will run your function immediately when the code runs, and that's not what we want. Okay, so everything looks in order, and let's preview. And what I need now is actually the ID, which I forgot to copy. So I'm going to go back to the editor, and I'm going to copy this ID from right over here. And I'm going to go into preview. And I'm going to click the button, and you see that the name changed to Creighton. Okay, and that our console logged. So this is a semi-realistic situation because usually, a user won't have their ID unless you choose to use that as, kind of identifying information, and that is how a certain person is supposed to look up their information in the database. Usually you would maybe create a new ID that was an identifier and use Wix query instead, which we'll talk about in the future. But this is a slightly more realistic situation than you going into the data set, the collection, and copying the ID and going into your Wix code and pasting it. And just I'll give a few more examples where you might have the ID. So for example, if you're getting the current user, then you would have their user's ID, and then you might use that to get some kind of information. Or you can see here, for example, I have a repeater, so I could possibly use this repeater to get an ID, and let me show you what that might look like. So I'm going to go back into our editor. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to use this repeater to get the ID instead of this your ID input. Okay, so how am I going to do that? So first of all, I'm going to going to do that under here. So I'm going to add an on items ready for the repeater. And let's see what I named this repeater up here. Repeater 1, so let's change that to people repeater. Okay, and I'm going to select that people repeater. And then I'm going to add the on item ready function, which basically, if you don't recall, it takes 3 parameters, item data and index. And this basically will run every time that our repeater is populated by data. Okay. And what I want to do is I want to add an event listener for each specific item. Sorry, that's not how that would go. So instead of W, we use item here. And let's check what these containers were called. So this container is called container 3. Let's change the name of that to, item. Yeah, I don't have that yet. Okay, so item dot on click. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use this function. Okay, but instead of having my ID defined here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that my ID is a parameter for this function. That means when I run this function, I need to pass it an ID. And then I'm going to say find name with ID. But since I'm running this with a parameter, I actually need to wrap this inside of another function. Because remember, like I said before, I can't have this function running directly inside of the onClick event. So I'm going to run find name with ID. And the way I'm going to get the ID is using the item data parameter, because the item data is essentially all the data that is belonging to each of these individual items in the repeater, even if it's not being displayed. So I'm going to go into here and say item data .id. And okay, so if all is working, then this submit button we're no longer using. I'm just going to comment that out. And what's going to happen is when I click on a certain item in the repeater, the name field here on the bottom should be equal to the same name field of this repeater. So let's go and preview the code. Whoops, I don't know what happened over there. So let's just start here with gray. So if I click here, then you'll see on the bottom, the name turns to gray. And if I click Junie, then the name here turns to Junie. Okay, so this is a quite useful functionality for this repeater. For example, if I have a repeater and I want to display only part of the information, and then here on the bottom, I want to display all the information from that ID, from that item, then this could be a pretty good use case. And you might be saying to yourself, okay, but why do I need that? Because I have here item data, okay, which is also equivalent to all of the data from that specific item. So I could just use item data instead. So I have two answers for you. And one is that you don't necessarily have to pass in all of the items data to your repeater. If your repeater is connected with a data set like mine is, then it will indeed be all of the item data. But if you're populating this repeater also using code, you might have chosen to only pass in some of the items data from the data set. And in that case, item data will not be equivalent to the entire item. So you would need to use get if you wanted to get additional information. And the second thing is how updated your information is. So for example, in a repeater, okay, once my code is running, so once my website is live and I'm on that page, my repeater will be displaying certain information. But if that information is updated and I'm not updating the repeater in real time, that I might not have the freshest data. And I would want to use something like get in order to get the item from the collection. And let me try and demonstrate that to you right now. Okay, so for this part of the demonstration, I went ahead and I created a new text field, which is the city display. So now when we click on a certain item, we'll display the name, and I'll set it up over here so that we also display the city. So I'm going to go ahead in here and city display to select that. And the text will be equal to item dot, and then I need to go over here and check what the name of that field is. The field ID, and that is city new. So I'm going to go over here and city new. Okay, so now my city and name should both be displaying when I click on an item. And what we're going to be doing now is be working on the published website. So I'm going to go over here, I'm going to publish my site. And then I'm going to go to the page for the WiX data that we've been using. And I'm going to go ahead and refresh it. And now on the bottom here, you can see our two displays. And when I click it, you'll see that it basically replicates what's showing in the repeater. So we have on top here the name, and then we have the city. And if I click here, then it changes over here as well. Now, let's say that I'm on this web page, and somewhere else on the website, on a different page, somebody changes the data of this item. So they change the city of Junie to something else. And now I'm going to mimic that situation by going into my collection here in my editor and actually changing that data by hand. Again, this doesn't have to be changed by hand. This could be changed using some kind of input on your website. But if your repeater is not updating in real time, then what will happen is it won't be showing fresh data. So if I go over here, and let's just zoom out a little bit so I can find Junie here. So we have Junie over here. And then let's just scroll to city new. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and what was the name of the city again? Okay, Quasi. Okay, I'm going to change this to just New York. Okay, and okay, saving, all changes are saved. But if I go to my website and I click back on Junie, now you can see that when I clicked on Junie, it shows me Junie and New York. So I get the freshest data from the data set, even though that's not the data that I have in the repeater. Whereas if I was to use the data from the repeater, then I would be displaying stale data here, old data. And let me show you what that would look like. So I'm going to go back to the editor. And now instead of using the get, let's minimize this. Instead of using the find name with ID function, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this. So I'm going to copy this over and I'm going to comment this out. Okay, and then on click, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say city display dot text will be equal to item data dot first name. Okay, sorry, will be equal to dot city new. Okay, and this will change just the okay, great. Okay, so basically what this should do now is it should be showing me the city when I click on the item. Okay, it should be updating the city. It won't update the name, but it'll just update the city. So I'm going to click publish. And I'm going to head over back to my live website and I'm going to refresh. And you'll see that when I refresh the page, it'll actually show Junie as from New York because it's pulling new data into the repeater. And when I click here on Junie, you'll see it changes to New York. Okay. But if I go ahead back to my editor and I change the collection again, so I'm going to go to the collection example and sorry, I'm going to open the collection. And I'm going to go and find Junie. Okay, select this just so I know which one I'm talking about. And go here to New York and change this to Shanghai. And I'm going to go back to my live website. And let's click on gray. Okay, so it's Antipolo. And then I click on Junie and you see that it shows New York. Because what I'm doing is I'm using the data from the repeater and not the data from the collection. And those are two different things. And that is a more realistic use case of the get method where I want to get the freshest data from my collection and not the data that was being displayed inside of my repeater. So I hope you liked this video. If you did, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And the next video will be continuing with more of the WiX Data API methods. So thanks for watching and see you next time.